Good evening, I'm Diana Sky, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Donald Trump says that the war in Ukraine must end. Now, today, the German chancellor talked with Russia's president over the phone about peace in Ukraine. But Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that call could be opening a Pandora's box. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Hungary calls on the EU to reconsider sanctions on Russia amid the energy crisis. Poland cracks down on reckless drivers after a string of fatal alcohol and drug-related crashes. And she wants to be the next president of France, but new accusations from the prosecutor's office could thwart Marine Le Pen's plans. It's got to stop. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has broken his silence on the war in Ukraine in his first major speech since his re-election earlier this month. Now, Trump reiterated his position that the conflict must be resolved quickly. And as Poland and the rest of Europe are bracing for a potential shift in U.S. policy, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held a phone call with Vladimir Putin for the first time since the beginning of the war. Our Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
While he hinted at this approach before, when he was just a Republican candidate.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly.
His words now carry a much bigger weight, as he will soon be the 47th President of the United States. In his first major speech since the November 6th election, Donald Trump once again suggested the US will soon change course when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
We're going to work very hard on Russia and Ukraine. It's got to stop.
The approach of ending the war as soon as possible is in stark contrast to the current attitude of Kyiv's Western allies, including Joe Biden's administration. "We'll support you as long as it takes" is nowhere to be seen in Donald Trump's speeches. After close to 3 years of a prolonged tug-of-war on the front lines, it seems the chess pieces are beginning to move again. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time in 2 years on Friday. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed on his social media that the call had taken place.
I have received a call from Chancellor Scholz, who gave me an account of his talk with Vladimir Putin. I was satisfied to hear that he not only condemned the Russian aggression, but also reiterated the Polish position: nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
And Ukraine does have a lot to say on the future of the war it is currently fighting day and night.
Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls, just a lot of words, and this is exactly what Putin has long wanted.
Members of the Ukrainian parliament are skeptical of the new US president's promise to end the war overnight.
We have an army of 1 million people who are fighting, who are ready to fight. We have a society where the majority of families have either someone fighting at the front or have lost someone at the front. And so right now, pressuring this society into some kind of the peace deal will be a very hard topic and very hard goal.
But Ukrainians are now facing not one, but two enemies at the front lines. North Korea entered the fight a few weeks ago, sending both soldiers and ammunition to the Kyiv-controlled Kursk region. Pictures showing North Korean artillery being transported towards Ukraine through Russia have also been circulating on social media, but we cannot confirm their validity at this time. In the face of this major development, Ukraine's Western allies are ramping up their diplomatic activity. Poland had sent a delegation to North Korea to assess the possibility of resuming the works of its embassy, one of the few European facilities which had operated there before the shutdown of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Embassies not only operate in friendly countries, but also in places where we can learn some valuable information. We've discussed this with our allies, and they are very supportive of our diplomatic move.
Polish officials have also recently met with Donald Trump's advisors. The mayor of Warsaw and potential presidential candidate Rafał Trzaskowski spoke with former US Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy and retired General James McConville in the Polish capital.
I think it's a strong signal that the United States, whether under Democrats or Republicans, sees the relationship with Poland as critical, important, and worth spending time to maintain and build relationships with, regardless of the political construct in the United States.
Warsaw is hoping to play a bigger role in Europe and the region, both diplomatically and militarily. The Polish government plans to spend close to 5% of its GDP on defense next year and is already allocating more than 4% for this purpose. As the old maxim says, if you want peace, prepare for war.
The European Union has been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine in both political but also financial support. Now, to help Kyiv with reconstruction and bolstering its resilience, another tranche of 4 billion euros has been approved under the so-called Ukraine facility. Now, our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach has this next report.
Ukraine needs all the help it can get, and this is good news today. There's a green light by the Commission of the so-called Ukraine facility. Now, this idea stemmed from a few months ago. This is a special mechanism, an instrument, as they call it, a facility, to provide up to 50 billion euros from the European Union between 2024 to 2027. Now, already there's been the first tranche has been released. Now, there's a positive assessment by the Commission. And that means it's now up to the Council, that means another institution here, to also go ahead and make sure that this is released. But it is good news today, and it does mean also this is 4.1 billion euros that can go to reconstruction, making sure that the Ukraine is ready for EU accession. And also this is a positive note on reforms in Ukraine. We heard that at the Commission today.
Ukraine has met the preconditions agreed for the disbursement of this additional 4.1 billion euros. Of course, the next steps is that now this is in the hands of the Council. Once this happens, we would reach basically 16 billion euros already disbursed under the facility for Ukraine this year.
Now, with that, it's positive news indeed. Now, this could, once it's actually dispersed, timing-wise, could be already until the end of the year, 16 billion euros for Ukraine, which is vitally needed to keep Ukraine and the country going, and more could be there in the future. That's Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Brussels.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán says sanctions against Russia are hindering the EU's competitiveness and therefore should be reconsidered. Now, while most of the bloc has weaned itself over Russian energy imports, Hungary still gets more than 3/4 of gas and crude oil from Russia. Marek Steele has more.
Viktor Orbán has a new idea on how to lower energy prices in the European Union. He proposed to lift the sanctions imposed on Russia.
Energy prices need to be lowered by all means. This means that sanctions need to be reconsidered because under the current sanctions policy, energy prices will not go lower.
High energy prices are a problem for households across the globe. Orbán argues that what US companies pay for gas and electricity amounts to only a quarter of price rates in Europe.
I would call this a provocative stance because there is a bit of truth in what Orbán is saying. In the past, Russia was regarded as a fairly cheap reservoir of oil and natural gas. Those who reaped of that source were competitive.
This changed with the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Since then, Brussels has imposed more than a dozen sanctions packages against Moscow for its illegal invasion. But Orbán emerged as the sanctions' most vocal critic within the bloc.
With Viktor Orbán's style of government, that also fits more and more into the Putin camp and less into the European bloc. And that's something that you see almost on a daily basis with his clashes with Brussels.
In exchange for support for sanctions in other areas, the EU allowed Hungary to remain energy dependent on Moscow. Budapest still imports more than 80% of its gas and crude oil from Russia.
Reckless drivers are increasingly finding themselves in the crosshairs of Polish authorities as the government in Warsaw focuses on improving road safety. Now, recently, two infamous suspects accused of causing deadly accidents and fleeing the country have been arrested abroad. Now, one of them has already been extradited to Poland. Franciszek Pilis has more.
While car accidents are a sad and unavoidable fact of life, rarely do they get more tragic than this. In September 2023, a family of three were returning from a seaside holiday when they were hit by a car going over 250 kilometers an hour and killed on the spot. The man suspected of causing the deadly crash, Sebastian M., remained free long enough to flee the country. A year later, he was apprehended in Dubai after Polish authorities issued an international arrest warrant. He's still there today, awaiting extradition to return home for the trial. Sebastian M. is not the only Polish reckless driver who, upon being named a suspect, has fled the country. Łukasz Rzet, accused of causing a deadly accident in Warsaw, was just seen back in the Polish capital after being extradited from Germany. He was suspected of killing a man and injuring 3 other people during his drunk joyride through Warsaw and fleeing the crime scene without offering help to any of the victims. According to his lawyer, he pled guilty to the charges. While Polish roads are far from the most dangerous in the EU, the life-threatening habits of some Polish drivers have pushed the government in Warsaw to propose changes to stiffen punishments for reckless or drunk driving. This includes introducing lifetime driving bans for DUI offenders and creating new guidelines to help Polish police deal with an increasingly popular trend of illegal racing.
Road safety is one of the most important objectives of the police. I believe and we hope that these proposals will be implemented by us, by the government, that they are supported by the lower house, by the Senate, the President and the general populace.
However, one question remains. What compels people to drive so fast and so recklessly? We asked Karolina Pilarczyk, a professional drifter and thrill seeker.
It's exciting. It gives you a fun. And I can understand it, but there are special places to do this. There are racetracks, and there you can feel the adrenaline, and it's not something what you should do on the normal roads.
And what do psychologists think is the main motivating factor behind this phenomenon?
I think that this is not the problem of or the reason of that people are looking for the adrenaline is, in my opinion, the problem that they are not taking the consequences of the action.
While zooming past other cars or getting behind the wheel after a few drinks might bring a temporary adrenaline rush, only one feeling lingers after a crash: deep regret.
I would never do it again. I would never go back to this sort of behavior. I wouldn't get behind the wheel after drinking.
Driving recklessly or while drunk ruins lives, not only of the victims and their grieving families and friends, but also of the perpetrators, who either face lengthy sentences or flee from authorities, always having to look over their shoulder.
The Belarusian regime has doubled down on repressions against opposition activists and their families 2 months ahead of the country's presidential election. Now, since September, more than 1,200 political cases have been brought to courts, most of them on charges of spreading extremist materials, according to the independent Belarusian human rights group Vyasna. Piotr Miszczuk has this next story.
Dozens of people are getting arrested daily. Some of the detainees are beaten and tortured. This is the doing of Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko, who is yet again stepping up efforts to stifle political dissidents in the run-up to the presidential election come late January. He now appears to be targeting a wider group of people.
People are detained for their political views. People are detained even for being relatives of political prisoners.
The Russia-allied strongman who has been at the helm of the Belarusian regime since 1994 is expected to further continue his anti-opposition repressions ahead of the election. An election that he will likely rig and influence in other ways, just like he did with the ballot back in 2020.
The pressure is made on relatives of political prisoners or people that appeared abroad. So this is just a new mechanism because the last elections made a huge trauma on his psychology.
There seems to be little hope for a political change in Belarus in the near future, as that would require some extraordinary factors to play out.
If Lukashenko dies or if something is going on in Russia. That's the case. That's a period of time when we can talk about some changes inside Belarus.
Many opposition leaders who could threaten Lukashenko's position have been exiled, like Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who challenged Lukashenko in the previous election in 2020, but succumbed to the country's apparatus and thus was forced to leave the country a day after the 2020 election. Those who are not in exile are in penal colonies or behind bars.
People are kept in awful conditions in prisons. People are deprived of any medical care. We have a row of people who are literally dying in prisons, people with cancer, people with diabetes, and they don't get any medical aid.
According to official data, there are nearly 1,500 political prisoners in Belarus. Human rights groups, however, indicate that this figure might be even 3 times higher.
French prosecutors are requesting prison time and a 5-year ban from politics for the French far-right leader Marine Le Pen, possibly spoiling her plans to run for president in 2027. The reason? Suspected embezzlement estimated at 4.5 million euros. Sonia Gatabishchan reports.
The French far-right party National Rally and its 25 officials, including Le Pen, were accused of using funds intended for EU parliamentary aids to benefit the party and pay staff who worked for it between 2004 and 2016. Le Pen has denied the accusations, arguing that the trial is politically motivated.
The only thing that interested the public prosecutor was Marine Le Pen. That's it, Marine Le Pen, to be able to ask once again for her exclusion from political life with provisional execution, and then the Rassemblement National, to be able to ruin the party.
The trial is expected to finish on November 27th, with a verdict to follow in early 2025. The defense will speak in the coming weeks, and the judiciary insists that the legal process is respected throughout.
In the end, the only question that matters is to determine, based on the body of evidence, whether parliamentary aides worked for the MEP they were attached to or for the National Rally.
Former Polish ambassador to France, Tomasz Szydłowski, believes in the judiciary's impartiality.
Justice is independent, and it is for me something I can't accept, to say that the action of justice have political ground. No.
Le Pen ran for president 3 times to date, being a runner-up to President Emmanuel Macron in the 2017 and 2022 presidential elections. Although she is ready for a guilty verdict, which would bar her from running for president in 2027, she has no intention of lowering her political ambitions. The future, however, remains uncertain.
In politics, all ends are open. A year ago, we considered that Mrs. Le Pen could run and could win next presidential elections. Now we are not sure at all.
Prosecutors have also requested that the National Rally be fined €2 million and Le Pen €300,000.
Polish authorities are encouraging more people to invest in capital markets in an effort to boost the Warsaw Stock Exchange. As Ovidiusz Nicea reports, Poland has yet to tap into the full potential of its financial markets.
The Polish stock exchange has been underperforming, especially if you compare it to exchanges in other countries with similar population as Poland. The representatives of financial institutions and experts who have gathered at the TVP World Economic Summit largely agree that Poland has tremendous potential also in that area. As the largest economy in Central Eastern Europe, Poland would like to present itself as a sort of natural leader in the region, also when it comes to finance.
After the global financial crisis, it obviously went down, but then it didn't fully recover. We are now probably around 20–30%. The fall during the global financial crisis was also present in other stock exchanges, but many of them recovered. We haven't quite so.
Given that the Polish financial system has proven to be a stable base for a development of the country's economy, we should be very careful and prudent in advocating radical changes to the current setup of the Polish financial market.
The economists and representatives of Polish financial institutions have discussed here how to encourage people to, instead of keeping their money in the bank or investing in real estate, to put their money into capital markets. And some of the suggestions that they had is a better financial education of individual investors, as well as improved governance of state-owned companies. For TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicieja.
From German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's recent call with Putin to the potential impact of a Trump presidency on U.S. support for Ukraine and to the EU's energy strategy. Now, there is a lot at stake here for Ukraine. And joining me now in studio for expert insight on how these developments could affect Ukraine's security, economy, and future of the country is Ukraine's former Minister of Economy, Pavlo Sheremeta. Sir, welcome. So thank you so much for being here on TVP World News tonight.
Good evening.
Let's begin first with this talk between, this phone call between Chancellor Scholz and the Russian president. Sir, I mean, they haven't spoken in 2 years. How do you interpret this, the timing of the call and, of course, the potential implications for Ukraine's security and sovereignty? Why did this call take place?
I don't know why it took place, but I do know it would be much better if President Putin would call Chancellor Scholz, begging him to stop launching the Taurus missiles into the Russian territory and to slow down the advance of the Ukrainian army. That would be much better. The current call under this condition is troubling, at least.
Do you think that diplomatic engagement with Russia would lead to any tangible outcomes?
Well, we don't know, but look, the overall mood now with the new team in the White House is to spearhead some kind of a solution. What worries us Ukrainians is, first of all, the discussion that are happening actually behind our back, as it looks like. I mean, there are phone calls afterwards, maybe a day later, as Chancellor Scholz said. It's interesting that he called your Prime Minister sooner than he will call our President, which is actually not so funny. But yes, the mood is to find a solution, and that mood we welcome that mood. But two things worrying, as I said, that number one is behind our backs. Number two is that it might be on the terms that are not favorable to Ukraine, given the current dynamics of the battlefield.
Let's go into, as you mentioned right now, into Trump's cabinet. Now, what we do know is that Trump said that he intends to pursue direct negotiations. I mean, many times he said he can, find a solution to this war in one day. He said he's keen to send a Ukraine envoy to Ukraine. How feasible is this approach? And what is it going to mean for Ukraine's territorial integrity? What can you say about this?
Well, look, an appointment of envoy, specially focused on this particular war and invasion and how to deal with that, I guess it's a good news. The more communication we have with the new leadership team at the White House, the better it is, because through the communication we can develop a better understanding and a stronger trust. Now, we have to understand that the U.S. is not the party to the war. It's Russia invading Ukraine. And from what we can see, there is no interest whatsoever from Russia at the moment to slow down not only the advance that they're having, but continuous every night bombardment of the Ukrainian cities, including the Ukrainian capital.
How do you anticipate Trump's return to the White House might affect Ukraine's economic and military support? I mean, given, of course, the ongoing Russian bombardments as well.
We understand that the resources are limited everywhere in the world. We understand that both the European Union and North America, including the United States, have urgent, pressing investment priorities at home. We appreciate the help and assistance that was given both by the European Union, North America, and other regions and countries of the world. We understand that this cannot be endless, although, of course, if you take proportionally, the economy of the developed world is much bigger than the economy of Russia, even if you add North Korea. That happens to be, by the way, the economy of North Korea is 1/60th of South Korea, just South Korea. So South Korea is about 58 times bigger economy than North Korea. So the strength is actually, of course, on the Western side, and the President-elect Trump phrase that peace through strength is the right phrase. What we see at the moment, back to the beginning of our discussion, I'm not sure that these discussions is peace through strengths.
Right.
Regarding the financial and economic support, as I said, we understand that there are other priorities present. We understand that any kind of leadership wants to divert the resources that are going into the war. Looks like almost an endless war. They were to be used at home. At the same time, of course, all the existential issues that we have. If Ukraine falls, God forbids, you basically have this kind of reckless, brutal Russian army at the doorstep of the European Union and NATO. So it's better to spend maybe 1 or 2% of GDP, of general GDP of the Western countries.
Ukraine also just had a recent approval of 4.1 billion euros, right, under the Ukraine facility to aid in its reconstruction. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, what about reforms? What does Ukraine intend to do about reforms and also with these new funds?
Well, two things, of course. It's reconstruction, because many buildings, and especially the crucial buildings, many schools, many hospitals are badly damaged. Of course, they need the reconstruction. Lots of infrastructure, like bridges, are destroyed, so they need to be reconstructed as well. This support also goes into the budget to support Ukrainian teachers and doctors, because all the taxes that Ukraine collects at the moment goes into the military effort. Now, combining your two questions, it's very important to mention that Ukraine does go through very serious budget optimization process right now, because I feel the pain, for example, from the mayors. Mayors are complaining that resources are diverted from the Ukrainian cities into the central budget. No, why is that done? Because that resource is needed to support the Ukrainian budget. So Ukraine does go through its own homework, optimizing its expenses to make sure that we can sustain this war of attrition.
Let me ask you this a little bit on shifting a little bit of a topic here. I mean, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán really is calling on the EU to reconsider sanctions on Russian energy. What alternatives exist for EU countries to reduce reliance on Russia? And especially, I mean, we're looking at Ukraine having a tough winter ahead.
Well, back to the US, back to the new team. My understanding is that the new team wants to significantly expand the oil and gas production in the United States. So I guess more supply from the US, more demand from Europe. We have both ends meet, and it's a win-win situation at the end of the day.
Just very briefly, I want to take you to another interesting coming out of Russian state television. So since the elections, of course, they've been going on to TV to talk about, I'm talking about Olga Skabeyeva, Solovyov. They're really talking about this Trump's new cabinet. And of course, criticizing here specifically as Pete Hegseth, who's going to lead Trump's Defense Department, and Mike Waltz, right? What do you think that Trump's new cabinet is going to have on Moscow? Why? I mean, what can you say worries them this time around?
Look, I'm not following the Russian news at all. I leave, I'm not the citizen of the United States. It's of course for the President Trump to select his own cabinet. However, I do have the feeling that that the understanding of what is at stake in Ukraine at the moment is bipartisan. Yes, there are voices in the new team, more isolationist, more like America first, but also there are still strong voices, I would call them Reaganite voices, Atlanticist voices. And it's, of course, there is some kind of the tension is going on. I would say it's a creative tension, and for example, the appointment or suggested appointment of the Senator Marco Rubio to the position of the Secretary of State, which is actually key. His position is strong, so I think we should watch also the appointments like this. And I don't know, maybe that worries Russia, but what worries Russia makes us happy.
Thank you so much, Pavlo Sheremeta, former Ukrainian Minister of Economy, on being with us here today on TVP World.
Thank you.
And this completes this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.